My name is Stuart Braithwaite. I live in Glasgow. I have been a musician since I left college, a professional musician. Well, I've been making music since I left college. I've been lucky enough to make a living out of it as well. I play in a band called Mogwai. I'll talk you guys through a little bit about how I ended up where I am 25 years into being in the same band and having a label that's putting out other bands and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm more interested in is your questions, to be honest, because I'm sure you've probably got more interesting things to ask me than I can think to say. As Keith said, I've already got a few. I think I've just got 3. So if you want to, if anything I say kind of triggers any ideas of something you want to know a little bit about, or I've maybe skipped over something that you all want to know a bit more about or know anything about, I'm happy to do it. That's what I'm here for, just to kind of share a wee bit of my experience and knowledge and help you all out too, to do whatever you guys want to do with music. So I'll go back to the very start. I started playing guitar when I was a young teenager, probably 12 or 13, something like that, just a kid really. And I had a lot of hobbies when I was young. I was really into swimming. I did a bit of karate. I was kind of skateboarding. I still like skateboarding. But the thing that really kind of got under my skin was music. I just heard a few bands, like the Velvet Underground and Joy Division and the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and it just kind of sparked something in me that I wanted to do that. I wanted to play music as much as I could. So when I was at high school, I wasn't particularly academic. I wasn't really that interested, to be honest. But I did study music, and I did well enough at music, not amazingly well, but just well enough that I managed to get into do a college course, an HND in modern musicianship at a college called Julianesque Valley College out past Edinburgh. And there I kind of met sort of other people, and part of the course was grouping up into people and making bands. And I formed a band with some people I knew at college. It was great fun. The band was called Dead Cat Motorbike. We started playing around, playing little gigs like Nice and Sleazy in the 13th Note in Glasgow, and a place called the Subway in Edinburgh. Just wherever we could, really. And made a demo, had a really good time. But the band didn't go for that long because our drummer was moving away. Our drummer moved to Australia. So I was leaving college. I'd done 2 years there, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed hanging about with my pals and making music, and I wanted to keep doing that. So I wanted to start a new band. And at one of the gigs we'd played at the 13th Note, I met this guy, Dominic, who was a friend of a friend, and we got on really well. And he played the bass, and I wanted to start this new band. I had a name for the band. I wanted to call the band Mogwai. So me and Dominic got together, started writing tunes, and I was still at college at this point, so we managed to use the free studio time, which is one of the best things about doing music courses at college, is you don't have to pay for studios. They annoyingly ask you for money as soon as you're not at college to use studios. So me and him and one of my pals who'd been in the band before, we made this demo, and it was pretty rough, but it was good enough to be able to get a gig. And the guy booking the bands at the 13th Note at that time had really liked my old bands. A really, really helpful, nice guy. Also a really good musician called Alex. Alex is actually probably well known to all of you because he's the singer in Franz Ferdinand. He went on to keep making music as well and form a band that sold millions and millions and millions of albums, which I'll probably return to answering one of these questions. But so yeah, we had this band. We got a drummer to join Mogwai, and we got a gig, and we practiced for this gig, and it went really well. and we decided to make a record. I'd actually met a DJ who's died a few years ago, but a very, very famous DJ on Radio 1 called John Peel, and we wanted to get our record played on John Peel. So Martin, our drummer, had his parents, for his birthday, his 21st birthday, I think, gave him some money to go into the studio to record. By this point, we're not at college anymore, and we couldn't record for free. So we went in and recorded these 2 songs, which were going to be our first 7-inch single. And we were just wee guys, we had no money at all. So to get the money to make the 7-inch single, not only did we have no money, we didn't really have any connections. We didn't know anyone in the music industry really at all. But at this point, in Glasgow, in the music scene, the kind of DIY music scene, all the bands were just making their own records, starting their own record labels. And so my sister's boyfriend, Jared, lent me 400 quid to make these records. We found a place in the Czech Republic that would press up vinyl for not a lot of money. So we made these records, 500 records, sent one to John Peel, and he played it on the radio. And I was playing drums. I play guitar. I should have mentioned that before. I'm a guitar player. But I was playing drums in this other band, Eska, and we'd been going to London to do gigs, and everyone I met in London, I'd give them one of these, everyone who was a journalist or someone from a label or anyone that I thought would be a good connection, I would give them one of these 7 inches. So by the time Mogwai got to go and play in London, we'd been played on the radio, we'd been played on John Peel, and I'd met a few journalists who I got them to come to the gig. So the very first time that we played in London, we got reviewed in the NME, the New Musical Express, which I'm guessing you're all a lot younger than me. I'm sure you are, but that was that was where everyone found out about music, because there was no internet. This is the 90s. There was no internet. This was how you found out about music, was either the radio or the music press. So there was 3 music magazines, the NME, Melody Maker and Sounds, and they were really influential. If they got behind you, you could really kind of make it. It was kind of a really important thing at that time. So we went down to London. I should point out that our first 7-inch was #1 on Rock Action Records, which was the label we essentially started to put out this 7-inch. It's named after the drummer, Scott Ashton, from one of my favourite bands, The Stooges, which was the punk band that Iggy Pop had in the 60s and the early 70s. But so going back to, we go down, we play this gig, we get good reviews, and round about the same time, John Peel asked us to do a session for his Radio 1 show called the Peel Show, and the sessions are called the Peel Sessions. A really, really prestigious thing to happen. All the bands that I'd grown up liking, bands like The Cure, Jimi Hendrix, Leonard Cohen, Joy Division, all these bands had all done this. So we went down to London. This is maybe our second or third gig in London, and recorded this Peel session. And off the back of that, this is kind of a sort of gradual build. Other labels showed an interest in us. So we ended up putting out a few 7-inch singles on different labels. Some really cool people, mostly people just doing it because they love it. You're not going to ever kind of make a living off selling 7-inch singles. But meeting some really cool people, having a really good time. And one of the people who'd been recording us for these 7-inch singles, for our second 7-inch single, was a guy called Paul Savage, who was the drummer in a band called the Delgados. And much because the Delgados had started their own label, but they were a lot more ambitious than we were at that point. They were putting out other bands as well. They had put out a record by a band called Bis, spelled B-I-S, and with Bis had actually got on Top of the Pops, which was a huge, huge deal back in until the show stopped, which I guess was probably a while ago now, but certainly as I was growing up and while our band was going, being on Top of the Pops was the be all and end all of being a pop star. Something we never managed to do, but Paul's band, the Delgados label, Chemical Underground, had done this, and Chemical Underground were starting to establish themselves as a label, not just a label that could put out 7-inch singles, but they were also putting out albums. They put out the Delgados album, his own band, and also a band from Falkirk called Arab Strap. And the other thing that was important to us and to me at the time was that this was all happening in Scotland. Up until then, almost all of the music industry had been in London. It's not very handy. It's a 7-hour drive. It's a long, long way away. And I like the fact that Chemical Underground was in Glasgow. Their office was in the East End, in Bridgeton. So it was quite close to where we all lived. We could go in and see them. And they asked us if we would be on their label. So we made the decision to sign with Chemical Underground Records. We put out 2 albums on that label. Both of those albums managed to get in the charts, and everything was just getting gradually but quite steadily bigger, to the point where we went from playing places like Nice and Sleazy's that hold 150 people to playing places like the Barlands in Glasgow, which holds 2,000 people, and places like the Forum in London that maybe holds even more, 2,500 people, something like that. So things were getting steadily and steadily and steadily at a higher level. Just go back to the music business side of things. There's a few things to get from playing to 100 odd people or whatever to playing to more than that. A few things don't absolutely have to happen, but it's good if they do. One is that your band needs a live agent, which is someone who have the contacts with promoters and festivals and that kind of thing. And we found an agent, a guy called Mick Griffiths, who came to see one of our very early gigs, probably in 1996, so just the year after the band started. And he was the booking agent for some bands that we really, really loved, like My Bloody Valentine, who are a really amazing, kind of brilliant rock band, Irish-American band. And he's still our booking agent to this day. He's put up with us for all these years, but that was really important. We also got a publishing deal. Basically, a publishing deal is where someone buys the rights to your songs. There's in the music business terms, there's 2 kinds of rights. There's the master right, which is the actual recording of something. So that's what the record label looks after. And then there's the publishing right, which is actually who wrote the song itself. So if someone else does a version of your song, then these are the people that make sure that you get paid for that. So we signed a publishing deal with a company called Chrysalis back then, and that actually was one of the reasons we managed to stay on a relatively small label like Chemical Underground, because we had this advance from Chrysalis. So yeah, the other thing is management. It's not absolutely essential. Some people are completely fine managing their own affairs 100%, but for a lot of people, especially young musicians, because when you're young, you're not very organized. Some people never get organized, but I think particularly when you're a teenager or in your 20s, it's sometimes quite hard to remember to do things that seem very boring at the time. So we had a manager around this time. He actually, we've kind of changed between managers over the years, and some people get tired of the music business, and for quite a while I did it myself. But yeah, we're back to having a manager doing it now. So that's the story of the band. Basically, some things have changed. In fact, yeah, to get to the next part, when our deal with Chemical Underground finished after 2 albums, we signed to another independent label, but a much larger independent label called PIAS. They had a new imprint run by a guy who'd come from a major label, who's now a really great author, actually, this guy John Niven, and he kind of wooed us away to sign to this label, which he didn't last that long at, but the deal itself was with the bigger company, PIAS, which stands for Play It Again, Sam. So we were with them for another 5 albums, and I had a good time, almost completely a good time. They were a good label. They had a lot of changes over the years, though. So the people working there when we left were not the people that were there when we started, which is something that can happen quite often when people go to work with bigger companies, because they have quite a big turnover of staff. So maybe someone will be your biggest fan, sign your band, and then for whatever reason, they are not working there the next year. So by the time you're putting your record out, you don't have the big fan there anymore. But thankfully, we had generally a really good time with them. But when that deal expired, we had, in the meantime, even though we'd been putting out our own Mogwai albums on PIAS, we'd been more and more using our label that we put out, that we started to put our very first 7-inch back in 1996. We're now into the sort of mid 2000s. We'd been putting out other bands. We'd signed some bands that we'd heard, and we had some bands that we'd worked with, and the label was slowly but surely becoming more established. We had a band called Errors, with a band called Part Chimp, and these bands were doing okay. They were kind of going out on tour, playing to decent amounts of people, getting played on the radio, and the label was getting more established. So we made the decision at that point to start to, now that Mogwai were essentially free out of contract, to put out the Mogwai records on Rock Action Records. So that was really a big thing for the label. That was making the label it was a big step for the label. We'd gone from putting out records that sold a few thousand to Mogwai, our own band, which some of our records had sold upwards hundreds of thousands. So it's a really, really big step. So we've been doing that ever since. That was about 10 years ago. Yeah, about 2010. We've kind of grown the label now to, we're putting out some other pretty established bands. We're putting out another Scottish band called The Twilight Sad, whose last album got in the top 20 charts. And they're old friends of ours that we've been touring with for years and years and years, and really, really honoured that they would entrust us with their something so precious as putting the records out too. So we're working with them. We're working with another great Scottish artist called Catherine Joseph, who won the Scottish Album of the Year award a few years ago. And yeah, it's kind of ended up in a really nice situation where we have control of all our own music. We're working with some other really great artists. We actually have control of our own publishing now. I mentioned earlier in the early days we'd gotten that deal with Chrysalis. That's expired. So we ended up getting a new publishing setup where we own our own publishing now as well. Someone administers it for us, so they do the work of collecting all the money, making sure that it's all sort of shipshape in a business sense. But we have control of all that stuff. So yeah, it's quite a unique scenario we're in, where we're kind of managed to kind of keep so much of this stuff in-house, which is a really great thing to be able to do. It's not something everyone can do, but yeah, it's really good. Okay, I think that's pretty much my little speech. So I'll go through some questions now. I've got 3 here, and I think I can see 2 on the screen as well. The first one is, what's the best way to catch the attention of a label? The more obvious one is make good music. If someone's making really good music, that's so essential. That kind of seems obvious, but making the very best music you can, something interesting and exciting, that'll always catch people's attention. But from my point of view, what I like to see from bands or artists, people making music, is that they are self-sufficient and that they are willing to work really, really, really hard. So obviously not applicable at the moment, but generally playing a lot of concerts, having a good social media presence, good at promoting yourself. So if you've got a release or a new song, kind of making sure you're all over Twitter and Instagram and all this stuff, just doing everything you can to promote yourself. I think labels are great and will help you as much as they can, but there's nothing can beat doing it off your own back. I think if you're out there just pushing your music, then that is definitely the best way to catch a label. Also, just make connections with other musicians. If you know a band that's maybe a bit further ahead than you career-wise, if you ask to support them, just getting on some bills, getting in front of people, finding new people to play their music to, I think that is the best way to catch the attention of a label, without a doubt. Okay. Next question. Tell us more about setting up a small label. So yeah, there's a few things you need to do. You need to have artists to release. Obviously, we were in a position where we were the artists, so that wasn't a hard conversation. But yeah, make sure you've got music to release. Find a way of releasing it. So you need to get a distribution deal. We got a physical distribution deal because I'm so old that this was happening before the internet. But it was with a company called SRD, who's still going, Southern Records Distribution, really good company. But it's possible to also have distribution deals that are only digital, that will make sure that your music's on iTunes and Spotify and Apple Music and all this kind of stuff. So even if you're only putting out music digitally, which seems to be pretty much the norm these days, you need someone to do it. So there's various different companies that will do it for you. But you need to do a lot of research, because some of them are better than others, and some of them are good at some things, some of them are good at other things, and you need to find the right people for you. So yeah, I think that's it. That's all you need. All you need is music and distribution to have a record label. It's not. It's definitely not as tricky as it was in years going by, where you needed to get hundreds and hundreds of pounds to make some records. You don't even need to do that anymore. So yeah, that's all I can say, unless there's more details that someone wants to ask. Okay, there's a few more coming in, so I'll start to answer them a bit quicker. How much is the pay? That's really how long is a bit of string. If you have a record that sells an awful lot of copies, you're going to make a lot of money from that record. And if you have a band that are playing near the end of the day at a festival, you're going to get paid pretty well for that. It takes a while to get to that stage, though, and I'm not going to lie, a lot of people don't really make much money from music, and it can take a long time to make money from music. So it really depends. Although someone might just write one random song and it sells tens of millions of copies and they're instantly a millionaire. So really there is no answer to how much is the pay. The pay can be very good and the pay can be non-existent. It really just depends how much people like your music and how things are. Because obviously this year's not a great year for musicians because no one can play any concerts. Okay. Rebecca Vasmant, creating a new record label just now in the current times, do you think there's anything appetting-wise worth noting? Releasing on the label, all formats, final included, thank you. I think appetting might be a typo. If you can tell me what you mean, then I'll come back to that. Okay. Hello from a huge Mogwai fan from the Czech Republic. Not far from the record pressing plant you mentioned. That's nice. I have an academic type interest in the economics of the music industry. Obviously, the model that was in place for the 60s to the 90s of music labels being gatekeepers to music that are available for people to buy has been upset since the introduction of digital music distribution. This, along with the ability to record high-quality music without huge budgets, brought in the ability for bands to take a more direct role in the production, distribution, and maintenance of fan networks. I'm curious to know what levels of success need to be obtained in order for musicians to be able to sustain something like a normal life without requiring work outside of performing music. I guess there is also a changing issue in the timing of COVID when live gigs aren't possible. Any discussion on this issue would be of great interest. I think that maybe goes back in a more structured way to the how much is the pay. I mean, I think depending on where you live, if you live in London, then it's extremely expensive to live, and you would need to be a really, really successful musician to be able to afford to live there. But I would imagine that musicians can do things to make things more affordable. You can try and tour as cheaply as you can, not take too many extra people, extra musicians or extra crew with you. Try and keep it really small. I think if you do that and you're very smart with things like merchandise, and that can be a good way to make money, as can syncing your music, like getting your music put in TV shows can be a good way to make money. Bandcamp has been a really great thing this year. I think Bandcamp pays musicians so much better than any other digital format. Obviously, it's very famous, but Spotify hardly pay musicians anything. So it's great for publicity, but not for paying any kind of bills. So yeah, Bandcamp is a great way. But I mean, really, the level of success, it's really hard to quantify. It depends how much money you need. It depends what you consider success. I would think if you can play concerts that are reasonably well attended and you don't spend too much money, you can make money as a musician. That would be my short answer. Next question. Should you reach out to labels directly? If so, how do you choose what labels to go for? You should reach out to labels directly, 100%. People still send us CDs. I don't know if I have a CD player around too often, but people do that. how do you choose what labels to go for? I would suggest that you go for labels that put out music that you think people that would like your music like, if you know what I mean. Like, going right back to the very start, when we spoke to Chemical Underground, we knew that they'd had success with Arab Strap. And Arab Strap, even though they're quite a different band from Mogwai, probably have a lot of similar fans, and we both grew up listening to a lot of the same music. So if you can work out what bands you like is usually quite a good way of doing it, but definitely what bands the people that like your music like, see what labels are putting that music out and go and talk to them. That's the best way. How do you go about getting a song played on the radio nowadays? This is another thing that I maybe should have mentioned when I was talking about booking agents and that kind of thing, is radio pluggers. Record labels quite often employ radio pluggers, and it's like a live agent. It's someone that has a relationship with the people at the radio stations, because there's so much music released that quite often I think DJs just wouldn't even know where to start. So they'll have someone that represents a few artists that they like. So that's how a lot of things get played, although it's not always the case. When we started, we would send music directly. I know in Scotland, there's like Vic Galloway's got a show that plays a lot of new artists, so you could just send something straight to Vic. I know on Radio 6 Music, Mark Riley plays a lot of new artists, so I'm guessing people like that, you can just send them a record or a link or something like that. That's probably the best way you get played on the radio. When listening to demos, do you take into consideration a band's likes/followers? If so, is the pandemic you want to take more of a risk taking on new bands? And what points in band's progression would you best like to have demos sent, either earlier SoundCloud demos or produced studio tracks off Spotify? I would personally like the song to be finished. I'm not really interested in hearing a demo. And that's just my preference. The pandemic has not made me want to take more of a risk, because if I'm being totally honest, we've got less money because we've not been able to do as much work to make money, which is a sad situation. But definitely, it's I would love to take more risks signing new bands, but this is not a great year for that, if I'm being absolutely honest. But that might not be the situation for everyone. Another question here from Michael Jetton. That was from Stephen Corr, by the way. Michael Jetton. Among the bands and musicians who you're friends with and on your label, how many of them are able to maintain a living just playing and recording music? I think quite a few. I think the Twilight Sad live from music. I think Catherine Joseph lives from music. Errors, who are a band we had, they're not very active at the moment, but when they were active, they were making a living from music. So quite a few is the answer. I know a lot of musicians that also do something else, that'll also maybe have a job that they don't do all the time, or have something they can do around their music. So there's not, even if you're not a full-time musician, doesn't mean that you're not able to make brilliant music and still have a great music career. I mean, even some of my favorite bands, like legendary bands, now have jobs and just go on tour on their work holidays. Okay, let's see it. Anonymous one. Do labels mix and master your songs, or do you do that? That depends. Quite often the label will do the mastering, but the artist will do the mixing, depending on the deal. Really, like if it's a licensing deal, then the artist will mix it themselves and then it'll be licensed from the label. Whereas if it's a traditional deal, then the label will sort everything else out. Okay, here's one from James McGowan. Any regrets at bands that got away from rock action you should have signed, plus whatever happened to Errors? Yeah, there's a few regrets. Yeah, there's definitely a few bands we maybe had the opportunity to work with and we didn't. They're probably just regrets from my point of view, because I would have liked to have done it. These bands all went on to do fine, so it's not like the bands didn't do anything because we were involved. But yeah, I don't want to name anyone because that's a bit of a shame. But whatever happened to Errors? Errors are doing okay. I just don't think they're doing much music just now. I think they've just got jobs. Simon works for the promoter 432, and Steve has a job. I think he kind of helps people out in the community. So I'm sure they will make some music at some point, but yeah, not right now. Right, okay, Rebecca's cleared up. She said adapting. So let's go back. Oh, anything adapting wise worth noting? Creating a new record label just out in current times. Do you think there's anything adapting wise worth noting? Releasing label. Oh yeah. So you're just asking about putting something out, right? I don't think it's important to release everything on all formats at the moment. I think that's something that you do when there's demand for it. I think that's something, if something's really kind of, if you're starting a new label, you don't want to spend all your money making a bunch of records unless there's demand for them, because you do not want to be sitting with a pile of records. It's better to use the money you would have spent to make the records, to promote the artists, so they get to the point where those records will be needed. So that would be my advice there. Okay. Here's Michael Jen. Has the increased demand for vinyl helped Mogwai and your label's bottom line significantly? It's helped. Yeah, it's definitely helped. Yeah, we were quite lucky, and probably to do with the demographic of the people that like our music, but that people are still quite into physical product. So that is quite helpful, especially things like putting an album out, being able to put out like a deluxe box set, all that kind of stuff. That's without a doubt a really, really, really helpful situation. Yeah, it's quite strange when you look, because I've got a label, I get to see the charts, the proper charts, and you see the percentages of how many digital sales or streams account for an artist's sales, and it's nowadays 3/4 digital, 80% digital almost all the time. But in the times when we get in there, it's completely flipped, and it's usually 70% physical, 30% digital. So it's it's definitely good, although you kind of have to ask the question, well, shouldn't we be trying to get more digital revenue as well? But you can't have everything. Okay, so let's see. Michael again has asked, how much of Mogwai's songwriting process depends on your ability to do demos at home on computers? Do any recordings that you might do at home end up being fed into proper recordings? About 10 years ago, Barry, our piano player, moved to Berlin, which really kind of, we'd already started doing quite a lot of home demos on computers, but when that happened, that became essential. That became something that we had to do to keep the band going. So it's really, really, really been a lifesaver for us, really, to be able to record songs at home, email them to each other, try out ideas. Obviously, we still get back in the room and play everything together, so to the point where we're happy with how it sounds. But it's been really big. And the second part of your question, do any recordings that you might do at home end up being fed into proper recordings? The answer is yes. I mean, especially Barry he's a keyboard synth player, has all these amazing synthesizers, and quite often, even when we've gone into a really nice studio, he'll just use his recording from home as his basic synth parts or whatever, because it's not going to sound any better. Even the nicest desk in the world, it's just a bit of digital sound. So yeah, it does. Even I'm not a particularly great engineer or producer, but even quite a few of my parts, I'm literally just where I'm sitting at home here, just with my piles of keyboards and pedals and all that stuff. Even some of the stuff that I recorded just sitting here is on the new record, just because it sounded good. Something can happen, something be little kind of glitchy weird thing, and it is a 1 in a million chance of it turning out the way it's turned out. And yeah, the producer will just be like, that sounds great, we're just going to use that. So yeah, quite often some little bits of what I do, but big parts of what Barry does will end up on the final record. Okay, more questions here from James again. Do you have any hope that anything will come out of the UK government investigation into streaming services and payments to artists? I've got hope. I'm not sure if it's realistic though. I don't know. It would be great if it did, because it's really tough. I saw an artist. I'm friends with the singer Nadine Shah. I saw an article today where she was saying that she can't afford to pay her rent, even though she's got 100,000 Spotify listeners. I mean, that's just crazy. If you'd said to someone 20 years ago that your song will have 200,000 people listening to it, and you wouldn't have enough money to pay rent, they would just think you were nuts. So I think it definitely has to change. They have to. Well, they don't have to, but they should try and pay the artists more. The problem is that the labels still make a lot of money, because the labels are now making money from old music, which never used to happen. Once a record was out, you made the money when you sold it once, and that was it. Now people are making constant money off lots of new music, obviously, like they always do, but also just this huge mass of people listening to the biggest records of all time. It's like the radio, but the labels are getting paid. So there's not really that much in it for the labels to change anything. That's one of the problems. There's some more questions here. What's the best thing to say introducing yourself when approaching on a label online that doesn't know your music yet? Is it worth to ask immediately if they're looking for demos? I think you mean not demons, but you could ask if they want demons. I would certainly be interested in someone asked me if I wanted demons, or start to introduce yourself. That's from Stefania. What's the best thing to say? I just think the thing to say is, hi there. I presume you like the label. Just say, I really like the music on your label. This is our music. Let me know what you think about it. If you're looking for new artists, just be straight up, just be honest, just be open. I think, going back to one of the questions earlier, that it's really good to show labels what you've done on your own. If you can, there's got to be more to it than just, I've made these really good songs. Like, if you can say, I've made these really good songs and we've been played on this station, we've done these gigs with these bands. If you can show that you've got a sort of a lot of activity that you've sorted out off your own back, then that's great for labels, because labels want to know that they're going to invest in someone that's going to work really hard and has the ability to kind of grow themselves as well. Okay, back here. Another from Rebecca. Do you think that there's no value in putting records out on physical then? You would say it makes no difference just doing a digital release rather than vinyl CDs too? To go get new bands out there internationally. I'm not saying that there's no value in putting records out physically. No, not at all. I was just saying that I don't think it's essential, especially for a new label. I think for a new label, if you've got limited resources, then I would use those resources to promote the bands rather than to make piles of records. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite to say don't make records, because that's literally what I do. But I think a mistake a lot of labels do is they make records before there's the demand for those actual records, and then they're stuck with the records and they haven't used the resources to promote the bands. I know that seems really, really complicated, but yeah, I'm not saying not to make physical records. I love physical records. I just think for a brand new label, it's not essential to do it straight away. Michael says, when you sign a new band and have their first album ready to go, what are the steps you as a label use to get the word out? Well, like I said earlier, there's things like having a radio plugger, so you can try and get the music on the radio, which is obviously old-fashioned but really effective way of letting people hear music. You also get a press officer, who's someone who can approach magazines and now websites, obviously, and blogs, and get them to write about the band, just so the band have profile, just so that they're very visible when the record's out, and you can see that they have music coming out. Also, again, not relevant just now, but get them out playing live as much as possible. That's the best way to introduce someone to music, is to play them the songs on stage, especially if the band have or artist have are charismatic and have a good energy about them. If they can, that's the best way to introduce people to music. So just try and get people out playing live as much as possible. Okay, well, Rebecca, it's on a P&D deal, so the distro pays for all manufacturing costs, then take a cut. Okay, that makes a big difference. If someone else is paying to make the records, yes, of course, make the records. Okay, they cover all PR and sound too. That sounds like a really good deal, Rebecca. Yeah, if that's the situation, then yeah, of course, do that. I was imagining a more like bedroom situation. No, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, James is saying, how important is artwork on sleeves? I know I've bought albums purely because of the artwork. Do you have an in-house sleeve designer? I think artwork's really, really important. We don't have we use one person, Dave Thomas, to make a lot of our sleeves, but he's not literally in-house. He's just someone we have a really good working relationship with. He's been doing pretty much all the Mogwai stuff for about 15 years. And in fact, he independently of them signing to the label had also been doing all of the Twilight Sad records. So yeah, so he's someone we use a lot. Yes, you mean for Rockash? I presume that. So yeah, absolutely. I think I do it too. I'll see a cover and think that's really cool, and definitely check the music out. Okay. Someone's asking, in terms of traditional promotional activities such as magazine spreads or band interviews, are you able to track the impact on sales? Well, I'll tell you what, you maybe are not able to track the impact of individual interviews or features, but you certainly notice the lack of sales when you don't get any. So in a reverse way, yes, you can track the sales, because if you don't, if a band's press campaign or radio campaign is not what you want it, then without a doubt you'll sell less records. And I mean, thankfully this has never happened to us, but I know people that have went on tour in America with their band, and people have come to the gig and went, oh, when are you going to put a new record out? And they'll be like, it just came out last week. So if the promotional scenario is not effective, then yeah, you will not sell any records. People will not know that you've got a record out unless you absolutely hammer it home that it's there. Okay, Stephen is asking, going forward in the current climate, what is the best way to grow a band's followers and get people listening to your music without gigs? I think that a lot of people are doing a lot of online things, a lot of streaming events. I think that's looking really effective. Just trying to be as creative as you can. just trying to use, I mean, everything's now online because there's no physical events. I mean, for the Mogwai records, we would normally, when the record came out, be doing obviously a live tour, which is not happening at the moment, but also we'd probably be going around the record shops and doing things. I think we're looking at doing some of that online in partnership with the record shops. I think the record shops seem to have been really, really, really imaginative and been doing a lot of really good things to kind of keep their businesses going, which feeds into artists and labels as well. We really appreciate that. And so events, smart online things, playlists, people creating playlists with their own music and other music is a great way of generating new followers and new fans, without a doubt. Okay, here's another one from Michael Jen. I saw a series of tweets a few weeks back by a UK-based musician, perhaps retweeted by Barry, who is dreading the post-Brexit impact on touring in Europe. How do you think those changes will impact the financial feasibility of touring across the EU? It's going to be terrible, if I'm being totally honest. Having to get different visas for every country, having to do carnets, which is a list of every piece of equipment you've got. It's not going to be great. And as annoying as it will be for Mogwai, it will mean that we make less money, which obviously is not something I'm happy about. But what makes me much angrier than us making less money is people not being able to do it, which I think is an absolute certainty. Yeah, it's. I have no idea what people thought was going to happen with Brexit. See, people seem to, think it was just going to apply to other people that weren't them. But I don't know. I'm not that excited about having a black passport. So that's it. Well, I think that may be me. That's been really good fun. I've really enjoyed that. I hope you learned something or got a good laugh at the mad things that I think. But no, that was really, really good. And I think I'll. Oh, Stephen says thanks a lot. I appreciate that, Stephen. Thanks, everyone. That's me. Cheerio. Thank you. Bye-bye.